Welcome to another edition of Addiction, Cancer, Recovery, and Me. Today we're going to talk about sugar and how it impacts the brain, and specifically how it plays into addiction and how it can replace addictive substances. The information provided in this podcast is for informational purposes only and is not intended as a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. We are not medical professionals, although we have and will at times consult medical professionals. The content shared is based on our personal experience and research. This is Adrian's story from his perspective. Thank you so much for joining us.
You're more than welcome.
So I know that obviously you've touched upon before in a previous episode how how sugar played into your cancer treatment journey.
Yeah.
And how you were very conscientious to both eliminate sugars and in any form, processed, even in fruit form, food form, etc. Today, I'd really like to focus on the addict mindset and how sugar, can play on that. And so first, let's just open up a little bit as a kind of a slight recap on sugar and the science behind it. We know that the cancer cells process sugar differently. And there's this thing called the Warburg Effect that we touched upon in the previous episode, and glucose transporters. I won't get into all those technical aspects. People can kind of look that up if they wish. But there is some element of, does sugar actually cause cancer, or does it just fuel existing cancer cells? And so that is an important part of your journey. But today, let's talk about how sugar triggers addiction-like responses in the brain. And, we can talk about sort of the dopamine release, reward system activation, and tolerance buildup. Again, I don't necessarily want you to go into the technical aspects of all of that, but tell me how you experienced this kind of response to sugar, throughout your journey in dealing with addiction and cancer. And talk to me about what you witnessed and what you felt while working to eliminate sugars and go through your withdrawal.
Yeah, I think that's the kind of the more poignant point is that it wasn't probably until you haven't got it that you don't realise what it was doing or how you felt when you was on it. If that makes sense. I guess to elaborate. So when I was obviously, for years I've always had a sweet tooth for as long as I can remember, probably as do many. But I never gave it a second thought, and I never realised how much prevalence sugar had, on everything. It is predominantly, within reason, pretty much everything. But it wasn't until I tried to withdraw that I noticed what an impact it was having on me, because as I said, as you rightly say, we touched on this before somewhat, but the crashes, the side effects, which I understand withdrawal all too well, and I strongly noticed quite quickly. In fact, arguably even more powerful than at one stage with the drink, of how detrimental it was to my well-being. The shakes, the headaches, severe headaches, affecting my vision. Constant craving, nothing would satisfy me. I'd think I feel hungry, but I'm not hungry. And as I said, nothing could, and you know what? There are still times today where I have that kind of sugar craving. I feel that I need something to satisfy a need. All sounds very familiar. So yeah, as I say, so that was where I kind of noticed what it was actually doing to me the most. Not so much when I was actually taking it, because I was always taking it.
Right.
So I was constantly in the grips of sugar, and that was throughout my diet, from breakfast through to lunch, through to snacks in between, through the drinks that I was drinking. So yeah, so that predominantly it was the after effect was where I noticed more what it was doing, to be fair. But yeah, I can definitely say that having that sugar craving, if I hadn't had it for a few hours or whatnot, then by having that fix, I would notice a difference. You know, short bursts in energy. You know,
Okay.
a little bit more upbeat, a little bit more kind of wired is too strong a word.
Reward system, though. It gave you that, the dopamine release. Exactly.
Exactly. That dopamine effect, which I don't truly understand too much about, but I know that that's a thing, a big thing. And that arguably is what can cause a lot of the addictive, because the dopamine in itself is something that you crave.
Yes.
You know, that's kind of highlighted in a lot of areas today now.
Well, and effectively what it's doing is the sugar is activating a reward center in your brain, and it's similar to addictive substances, right? So you will have probably witnessed or experienced that same thing when you were drinking with the alcohol, right? Which is filled with sugar. Yeah, exactly. And so similar to alcohol, the sugar is giving that, activation to the reward system, and it can become a substitute, right? Sugar can become a substitute for alcohol. It's another addiction, essentially.
Absolutely, yeah. Exactly. So one substance for another, I guess. But yeah, I mean, it's and I think it'd probably be fair to say that I really never even would consider that as what was going on.
Okay.
Because I never looked at how addictive sugar could be. It never even crossed my path. It was just it's just the fact that that suits the need. I feel that I want that, so I will have it.
Right.
And and you're right. It becomes habit forming.
Right.
And I think that's the thing. That we're constantly eating to get that fix.
Right.
Which is we think that it's all about diet and our body, which of course is a major thing. Which we touched on about how it affects the body, but it's that wiring of the brain. Yeah. It's how and I learnt that during rehab. Albeit, I can't remember all the fundamental aspects, but I do know that it does actually rewire the brain, and your brain then becomes dependent on it, becomes part of that daily process.
Yes.
So it just goes to show the power that it does have. Yeah.
I think it's a really important point to raise too, because we are so quick to call alcoholics addicts or drug users addicts. But I think we rarely, and I want to be cautious with this and sensitive, but we rarely call people who eat too much sugar addicts. We just say they have a problem with sugar, or they eat too much, they're sugar fiends or whatever. Yeah. But I think it's really important to sort of recognize at what point it becomes an addiction, or has become an addiction, because it's affecting kids. Kids don't drink or use substances as early as they might take sugar, but from as early as birth. Yeah. It's in formula.
In formula milks.
It's in formula milk, So we are creating addicts, and to the extent that it is wiring the brain in a different way, we are in some ways leading them to become addicts in different substances later on, potentially.
I think that's a fair point.
Because of that addiction it creates, that dopamine response that they get from it, that then needs to be constantly fulfilled. So I think it's really important to label it as it is, personally. And it is, I think, as you've touched upon, really hard to quit. Yeah. Sometimes harder to quit. Right, I think you've touched upon it being sometimes harder to quit than alcohol and other things.
I think they do say. I mean, don't hold me to this, but certain other substances, are more difficult to come. It's more difficult to come off sugar than it is other. I've never used heroin or whatnot, but I have heard along the way that it is arguably more difficult to come off of sugar than it is some of these other substances. And I think half the battle is understanding where sugar lies, i.e. what products have sugar.
Right.
And
true.
It's across the board. Yeah. It's in pretty much in everything. Yeah. So I guess from where we've touched on, or you mentioned there about how, there are sugar addicts, which we don't really consider them to be addicts, but it's fair to say that it's through media, through advertisement, through you walk into a supermarket, everything down every aisle with the bright coloured wrapping papers. Yes, there's a reasoning behind all of that. Yes, it's pushed down your throat, so it's actually more difficult to avoid it than it is to take it,
which is part of why it's so hard to quit.
Exactly.
Yeah, because you have to sit there reading every single label.
Yeah, and it's amazing. This is the frightening part. You know, what you consider, you think, you know what, I'm going to change my diet. I'm just for breakfast today, rather than having a bowl of, I don't know, a real sugary cereal.
Yeah.
I'm going to go for a granola bar or something. You know, it's in a nice green, healthier packaging, and that's going to be healthier for me. But then when you flip it and you do your homework and you read, there's like 15 grams of refined sugar in there.
Right.
As well as the carbohydrate.
Right.
Which from the other, even from the good stuff that's in there, they still produce the sugars.
Yes.
So it might say there's 10 grams of sugar in this bar, but when you do the math and equate for the carbs and whatnot, there's probably 20, 30 grams in there.
Right.
And that's in something that's considered healthy.
Right. Exactly. Well, and that's an interesting thing maybe we should just go through a quick exercise of listing the types of sugars, because some people don't actually recognize, right?
Absolutely,
So
that's a good point.
You know, just I have them in front of me here so I can kind of go through it easily. But, you know, there's glucose. So there's things from fruits. Glucose comes from fruits and starchy foods. And it really does spike your blood sugar quite quickly. Then there's fructose, which can also come from fruits, honey, high fructose corn syrup. That is in a lot of foods, particularly in the US, I'm sure here too.
Also, yeah.
And then there's sucrose, which is your table sugar, right? And that gives that kind of sweet flavor and the energy source, but it also causes inflammation, insulin spikes. And then you have lactose, which is in milk and dairy. Again, and in a lot of baby formulas, you know, and it's a natural sugar with nutrients, but it can cause digestive issues, for example. And then last but not least, you have the refined sugar. So that comes in candy, soda, baked goods, and it really has all negatives. There are no real pros to this, but it's highly inflammatory and feeds cancer cells.
Yeah.
So just right there, we have 2, 3, 4, 5 different types of sugars broken down with kind of pros and cons. And, you know, most people I don't think would necessarily be able to kind of differentiate between the two. We kind of know that, you know, honey and maple syrup and other sort of more natural forms of sugar are slightly better for you. But even some of those have a very high glycemic index. So you have to be careful about the quantity in which you have it. And so... So with that, I'd love to, again, bring it back to you and your experience. Obviously, we talked about how hard it is to quit. Talk to me about some of the behavioral signs of sugar addiction as you witnessed them in yourself, sort of the cravings, the loss of control, and withdrawal. So you mentioned the withdrawal, but while you were going through this withdrawal, were you particularly moody during your cancer journey? Were you cranky? Did you feel like you were out of control at points?
Yeah, lack of energy. That was one key thing to start with. But that's funnily enough, once I started to train or, you know, get back into some serious exercise on a daily basis, that was replaced, because as you know, that releases hormones, that releases an endorphin. So there's a kind of it replaces those good feelings.
Okay.
So that helped. That did help me dramatically with the withdrawal.
Exercise,
okay. Exactly.
Yeah.
Because but the key, headaches, loss of focus, dry mouth, constant craving, you know, for anything. And I did actually start to put initially, when I first did this, I started to eat more in other areas, because I'm trying to fill that gap. As I say, I'm trying to satisfy that craving,
right? And
I couldn't find it anywhere. But you know, there's certain food types like bread, etc., processed especially. You know, I would be wanting that more, because I'd have a sandwich, or something. You know, albeit I'd cut right back on the bread, and eventually I completely weaned that out as well. But yeah, it was anything I could kind of get my hands on to try and fill that need. So yeah, it just goes to show the power that lies within it. Yeah, absolutely. You know.
Okay, so that kind of feeds nicely into the next question, which is sort of how, you know, if you're a person in recovery, right? And I'm talking about addiction recovery here. How do you kind of manage that sugar craving without substituting one addiction for another? Because that's a big issue. You know, sometimes people quit smoking, and then they turn to food, right?
Exactly, sweets or something or other. Yeah,
exactly.
It's changing the habit.
Yeah.
I mean, again, it's that wiring of the brain. You've got to change the dynamics of what you're doing.
Okay.
To reset the mind. So your daily routine has to change. You've got to mix it up so that over the course of time, it's not an immediate thing because it takes time for neurons to rewire and whatnot. So but you have to actively do something different to break that habit. And as I say, it's all about habit. Yes, there's a dependency there, and that's the big thing with sugar. It's not just habit. It is a dependency.
Okay.
It's proven it is addictive.
Yes.
So you've got to break that cycle. I'm not saying by any means it's easy, but by making a difference, by introducing the exercise and whatnot into the diet, by changing your eating habits and whatnot, you're starting to break that cycle, and eventually the rewiring, I should say, starts to take place. And
when you say eventually, some people, I think I have experienced this myself. So I say some people, but I'm included here. We sometimes expect these immediate results, and by immediate, I don't just mean like within a few hours or days. I mean within a few weeks, you expect to see your body change and whatnot. How long would you say it took you to really kind of rewire that brain? How long?
6 months.
Yeah,
I would say. Yeah, I would say that I really started to feel normal within the 6 month period, but there was a lot going on.
Sure.
There's as the story's all about. It's about cancer and addiction. So I'm battling both sides of that fence. So there's a lot of practice that I brought into play to change that mindset.
Okay.
Which again, topics for another day, but meditation.
Yes.
The spiritual aspect.
Yes.
All of my practice where I put a lot of energy into, all of those contribute to a change of habit. So that in itself helps to rewire that way, rewire the brain. I'm struggling with that one today.
That's okay.
So yeah, that for me is what worked, is changing the habits, introducing something new into my daily activities to break that consistent cycle.
Great.
And that might start with something really basic, getting out of the bed the different side.
Yeah.
Brushing your teeth with another hand. They say all of these which all
shaking
contribute.
Shaking up the routine.
Doing something different to make a difference.
Yeah. And do you feel like that's almost like a distraction, therefore, from the
Absolutely.
addiction?
Yeah,
like using it as a good type of distraction?
Absolutely, yeah.
So just doing anything you can that's positive, just to distract from that.
Absolutely, yeah. Get into, if you're into music, get into music. Use music when you're walking.
Yeah.
So like go walk in nature.
Yeah.
So again, something to take you out of because everything it becomes habitual. So you're in a process, you're doing day-to-day activities. It's like a routine. You're on, you get up, breakfast, blah, blah, you go to work, you come home, you put your normal TV program on, you might go to bed. Blah, blah, blah. So that cycle, then it plays out, and then there's nothing there to change. So you have to make that change.
Yeah.
And that's paramount. Make the difference, and the things will start to fall into place.
Wonderful.
Just like that.
Yeah, just like that.
It
super easy. 1, 2, 3.
And it is. No one's arguing the fact here that it isn't difficult. It isn't difficult.
Yeah.
It is, but do you want it?
Right. How badly do you want it?
How badly do you want it? And if you want it, you'll get it.
Yeah.
If you put the energy in.
I think there's also some element of sometimes as addicts, we almost need that. I don't know if it's constant change, but we need a bit of change because we get bored with the same old. So sometimes feeding, I don't know, I feel like I kind of crave change, particularly when I'm trying to get over something that I'm been really sort of head deep in and focus on for a long time. I get a little bit bored and then I get a little bit antsy. And sometimes that's when the addictions play up. It's because it's like, oh, I'm craving something today. Well, it's because I got a little bit bored or a little bit antsy or a little bit nervous. And so rather than turning to the sugars addiction, I just change it up with something else more interesting.
Absolutely.
Do you find?
Yeah, exactly. That's kind of, the same trail of thought as where, in line with what I was just saying. But I mean, again, the brain, as within addiction, as we're on the subject. So
right.
Your brain is very good. It's that devil and angel on the shoulder scenario once again.
Right.
It's very good at telling you what to do because it feels that you need it. Right. So, we say, I'm craving sugar.
Right.
I'm craving sugar. That means my body's telling me it wants sugar.
Right.
No, it doesn't. It's your brain is telling you it wants sugar because it hasn't had it for a while and you're wired that way.
Okay.
So if you can understand that by continuing down that path, you're going to cause problems. Eventually, one way or another, there's going to be an issue because of that substance.
Yeah.
You've got to break. You've got to make the change. You've got to want to.
Right.
It's like they say within AA. The first thing the most difficult thing to do when you walk in that room, and it takes people months, is to turn around and say, "I'm an alcoholic," or "I'm an addict," and or rather, I should say, "My name is so and so, and I am an addict," or "I'm an
Yes.
alcoholic," etc., etc.
Yes. Admitting it.
Or just by admitting it, you are changing that perspective. You're telling your brain something different to what it's already doing.
Yeah.
Or rather, you're telling it that I don't want this anymore. I'm admitting that it's a problem.
Yes.
And I don't want it. So I'm going to do something about it.
Yes.
And I'm not saying you're going to do that on your own.
No.
But you're putting your first step into play. You're walking, you're getting onto that path to make a difference.
Well, they say that first stage of recovery, or that first stage to making that change, is getting over the denial. The denial
Exactly.
is a psychological spectrum, let's put it that way. And the first stage is getting past denial.
And
so
it's
if
the
you
same
can
as-
admit you have a problem, then that's the very
100%.
first step.
Yeah. And even if you don't necessarily feel, I think it's assessing what that problem may be.
Yes.
So, for example, with the sugar,
Yes.
if you're eating 3 or 4 bars of chocolate a day or drinking 6 or 7 cans of Coke,
Yeah.
do the math.
Yeah.
Take a step back.
Even
and
just one
assess-
bottle of Coke. I know
Well,
people who go through an entire liter of
Well,
Coke a day.
I drank 2 litres of Diet Coke
Yeah.
every day when I was in recovery. And it
Wow.
was in the very early days.
In the very first stages of, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Imagine that,
and
yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
With the SPA team, and which again, another sugar substance, but
Yes.
as an alternative, which
Yes.
we may come on to. But
Yes.
but as I say, it's a matter of rewiring that brain, but to do so, you've got to want to, because you've got to break that habit. You've got to start telling yourself, no, I know in my heart of hearts, this isn't serving me well.
Right.
I need to make that change. And it starts with you, and it can only start with you. No one can make you do it if you don't want to.
Wonderful. You've touched upon it just briefly, so it's a great segue. Let's help our audience find healthier alternatives, right?
Cool, yeah.
Particularly those who are dealing with addiction or cancer. It's a great topic to help. What are the alternatives to sugar? And so there are some sort of natural sweeteners for cancer patients and people with addiction. So stevia is not my favorite, if I'm honest. We can maybe discuss that at a different point, because I still find it kind of not very natural. But specific types of, you mentioned dates. Raw honey in moderation, maybe some maple syrup.
Mm-hmm.
What have you used to replace sugar, or what have you even avoided? If
I mean, so basically, and as you know, initially I cut everything out. So that was predominantly cancer based, but from addiction perspective, I guess it's replacing those, as you just still in your thunder here, but replacing those really bad, unnatural sugars or refined sugars, or that you'll find in other processed foods, etc., and whatnot. But so going into fruit, because you have to go through a weaning process. I didn't, and I suffered for it.
Okay.
But it would be advisable that perhaps
you went cold turkey.
I went cold turkey.
Yeah.
Do
you think that helped you in some way, though? Some people prefer that. Some people can either quit smoking overnight, or they kind of peter it off. So people are different. Do you think that helped you in a way to get over it?
Well, I think for me, 100%, because as we've spoken about, the cancer connection. So I strongly, by shocking my system, by putting myself through that, it was a way, my body just went into shock mode.
Okay.
And I strongly feel, personally, that was a big kind of turning point in stopping cancer.
So in terms of your cancer, going cold turkey was great. Maybe in terms of your addiction.
Maybe you need to kind of...
It was an extreme withdrawal.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
And because obviously a big detriment aside of the withdrawal.
Yeah.
But, it's in the long run, you have to ask yourself the question, what's most important?
Right.
You want to get well.
Yeah.
Or you want to come off of something that is doing you a discern. So,
Yeah. Did you, so I know you eliminated all sugars, including fruit. What about things like sweet vegetables, carrots, beets, that offer also sort of natural sweetness with nutrients? Did you come off those as well in cold turkey? Or
Yeah, I mean, I've never been a carrot fan, to be honest.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I don't mind them raw, but I
Yeah.
was never got for the cooked one. But
Okay.
but yeah, so yeah, there must. I mean, it's, we've said that there's sugar in vegetables. So, and I was having a lot of vegetables, so
Okay.
I was definitely getting a sugar intake.
Okay.
But
But not the high concentration.
nowhere. I mean, as you know, I was having packets of biscuits a day. I was having
Before, yeah.
3 or 4 cakes, which we've already spoken about in the morning. So I was probably having 100 grams at one point of sugar a day.
Wow.
And I went down to probably 3 or 4.
Wow.
So, which is a considerable contrast, to say the least.
Absolutely.
But yeah.
Okay.
But yeah, so the weaning process for me was getting onto the fruit. The honey you touched on, because honey's is a fantastic antioxidant as well.
Yeah,
So
antiseptic.
and an antiseptic, absolutely, yeah. It's amazing stuff.
Particularly in its raw form. I want to caution
Yeah,
viewers
absolutely.
that honey, when it's not in raw form, is basically a sugar syrup.
Yeah,
It's,
yes.
you've boiled out all the most
Yeah, the
or
goodness
all
in
of the
it, yeah.
goodness out of it. So really, to get raw honey is the key, and most people don't know that. They just buy
absolutely,
the squeezy bottle one. My
Yeah,
partner says,
which
"Did you
is
get the squeezy kind?" And I go, "No, I got the raw kind in the jar." And he goes, "Oh, I hate that kind."
the real stuff.
He's
yeah.
like, "I can't squeeze that on my peanut butter toast." I'm like, "Well, maybe you shouldn't be."
Well, that's half the battle,
Yeah.
isn't it?
Yeah.
It's because we're wired in a way so if we want what tastes good,
Right.
rather than
Right.
seeing the wood for the trees and
Yeah.
having something that we actually need. It's
Right.
but it's no one's saying you should go and eat eating a piece of cardboard all day long.
Right.
Yeah, there's a lot.
You
of
have to
good
enjoy
stuff,
the food and love. And,
Yeah, I mean that's
and,
what
yeah.
the dates balance things out. That's what I mean. That's something new to me.
Right.
I only found this out as every day's a school day. I only found that out a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah.
And the only
What's that you just found out?
the dates.
The dates.
The
Yeah.
fact that they actually lower
The glycemic
level.
yeah.
Because I was concerned. I'll tell you why. Because I was actually concerned that I was again
Having too much.
the addict mind. I was like these, and it went from 1 or 2 a day to 3 or 4.
Yeah.
And I thought it's too much sugar.
Yeah.
Without doing my own due diligence,
Yeah.
shame on me because it's not like me.
It's
Of
okay.
late.
No.
But and it went to I looked and I thought, oh, actually, you've got to be careful here, not to have
Yeah.
too many, not because
Don't have 10 or
it's too
20
much sugar,
but
because it's actually
reducing
reducing
your
and
insulin levels
yeah,
so
exactly,
much.
Because
Wow.
so again, balance is important. So
Okay. Great. So as a quick, we wanted to keep this episode short because we'd already touched upon sugar to some degree, but just in terms of some key takeaways here, one is that sugar, yes, impacts cancer, but it also impacts addiction recovery. So even if you're dealing with one, you want to be really conscientious about that. And it impacts addiction in very similar ways to other substances in terms of addiction. So being very mindful about your consumption is really important. I would say another key takeaway is understanding sugar's role in the brain and how it helps kind of take control of cravings. So, and understanding the different types of sugars that can have that effect on you, so that you can then read the backs of labels and be a more conscientious consumer and improve your diet. And then last but not least, whole food sources of sugar are much better than refined versions.
Yeah, processed. Yeah.
But if you're, for example, in your case, dealing with both addiction and cancer, you want to be really careful about introducing any kinds of sugar because, you, in your case, we're quite certain or have certainly seen the benefits of sort of shocking the system and not having any sugar coming in because your body already produces it. And that actually benefited you. So just being very conscious of what's right for you in that moment, whether you're an addict or in cancer recovery or facing both.
Or certainly in the heights of the cancer treatment, because you want to do everything you can to stop feeding it. That's that's my kind of first protocol. Look at what's out there that will stop feeding cancer.
Okay.
And one of those biggest players is said to be sugar.
Sugar. Wonderful. Thank you so much, Adrian.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to our next conversation as always.
Likewise.
And please don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Every little bit that you do to help us spread the word is much appreciated. And we look forward to seeing you on the next episode of Addiction, Cancer, Recovery, and Me.